going to be moderating, be the introduction here. And a couple more last logistics. This is being recorded. So by tomorrow, you'll be able to find the recording of this on the Salt Spring Forum website for if some of your friends and family can't make it. So without further ado, we've done our land acknowledgement. My job is just to help manage the tech. If you have any issues, you can chat with me, which means you open that little chat box there, and on with using the little icon at the bottom, you can type something that's just to me, and I'll do my best to try to answer your questions. There's also something called a Q&A, which I'll also monitor, but Tara will not be looking at that. You can also send me an email, jason@netchange.co. I'll type that in the chat. If you're having any issues or if you feel like you need some support. So I'm going to be introducing Tara, who's then going to be introducing the candidates. I've known Tara for about 10 years now. I know her through climate change activism, and we've worked together on some interesting projects over the years, spent a lot more time together since she moved to Salt Spring. We're very lucky to have Tara in Salt Spring. The thing I would say about Tara is she knows everybody, and she knows people that have influence and make things happen. There hasn't been a time that I haven't chatted with Tara when she hasn't mentioned, not in any way of a name dropping way, and just like, oh, I happened to call the cabinet minister in Ottawa and talk to him about that issue. Or my neighbor owns this, corporation that did this environmental thing. And, so Tara is very well connected. I couldn't imagine a better moderator for the evening. So I'm now going to disappear. One last thing, you'd have to type your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. You can send me an email, jason@netchange.co, and I'll here to help you, but mostly we want to hear from the panelists. We are going to wrap up right at 9 o'clock, 8:45 will be around our last question. So thanks everybody, and over to Tara.
Thank you, Jason, and good evening, everyone. So welcome Salt Spring voters, as well as anyone else that's joining us from around the riding. First of all, I'd like to start off by introducing our three candidates. We have Adam Olsen, who is the incumbent from the Green Party. We have Zeb King from the NDP, and we have Stephen Roberts from the Liberal Party. And I'd like to thank you all for making some time in your schedules tonight in order to do this. We very much appreciate it. It's a long tradition doing this on Salt Spring with the forum. Now we've received a bunch of questions in advance, and we'll be taking questions throughout the debates. So anyone that is submitting questions, if you could please submit them asking either all the candidates or a specific candidate when you put them in. And the format we're going to follow tonight is very straightforward. Questions for all of the candidates have a 1-minute answer limit, and the questions that are for individual candidates, they will have a 1.5-minute limit. I have a little bell here, which you can hear. And if anyone goes over their limit, well, you're going to hear the bell when your limit time comes up. But if anyone goes over the limit by too much, I just want to know you to know that I have a fly that I can send out. And if and if anyone doesn't know what that reference is to, then I applaud you for knowing nothing about US politics right now. Okay, so we're going to start off with 2-minute opening statements from the candidates, and we're going to start alphabetically by surname. So that means we're going to start with Zeb King from the NDP first. And Zeb, you have 2 minutes to give us an opening statement. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much to the organizers. And I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from Olsen-Green territory over here in Brentwood Bay, and I raise my hands in respect. I'm an island boy. I grew up on islands on Vancouver Island and Up Island in the North Island. And I've committed my whole life to doing everything I can for social justice issues for people, but also in environmental causes for my whole life to try and correct things that way as well. I live here in Brentwood Bay with my wife, who's a nurse. And for 15 years, I've been a municipal council member in Central Saanich, where I've become finally accustomed to every week going to work and trying to get things done for people and for our planet. So as I'd mentioned, my whole life has been dedicated to this, and I've been organizing for a better world, which really means such things as, for example, when I was a youth in the North Island, I organized an environmental club in a logging community. I built trails into the Carmana and the Walbrand valleys to try to protect old growth forests when I was 16. And I've been dedicated for a long time. It's very important to me. What compelled me to run this time was what we all remember a few weeks ago. It seems like a longer time ago, but the skies filled with smoke and being told that it was too dangerous to go outside, even the worst air in the world for a period. This to me was a call to action. And so with that in mind, I had to step forward. I'm dedicated to improving upon, building on the Clean BC plan to take action on climate change, because we have a limited period of time. We have to do everything we can here. And so my experience on council will help that, because I've accelerated the climate plan there. We need to do this, but not leave people behind. And we need to remember we're all in this together. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Zeb. And now we will turn to Adam Olsen from the Green Party. Oh, you are muted, Adam.
Good evening, Aitz Gwachel. I'd first like to acknowledge that our work here is on the territory of my relatives in Selk'n'wayne, my ancestors, the Husaitnich, Cowichan, and Penelakut Quilnuk people. My name is Sahana Adam Olsen, and I've been honored to serve our beautiful communities here in the South Salish Sea, representing Saanich North and the islands for the past 3.5 years. My family has deep roots here. We've lived and worked and played on the lands and waters since time immemorial. When I was drummed into the legislature 3.5 years ago, in a good way, by my family and elders, I was given the responsibility to represent this whole territory, and as a responsibility I accepted with humility and dedication. When I look back at my first campaign for this job in 2013, I realized how much I had to learn about the Gulf Islands, the Saanich Peninsula, and First Nations communities here. I spent the next 4 years working to understand this complexity that is this unique collection of communities. Over the past 3.5 years, I did not take any of this for granted and invested in even further in getting to know the issues, the challenges, and the opportunities here. In that time, I've hosted 50 community meetings and dialogue sessions. I've had more than 1,150 meetings with residents, stakeholder groups, and organizations. I've come to learn that representing this riding requires an intimate relationship with the people and the place. As a legislator, I have an unblemished record of attendance. I've been successful in both holding the BC-NDP government accountable on issues like climate change, wild salmon, and old growth logging, while at the same time being a cooperative partner in the most productive minority government in our province's history. I'm incredibly proud of what we have accomplished in 3.5 years, and I look forward to the opportunity to continue to build on what we started together. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Adam. And now we are going to go to Stephen Roberts from the Liberal Party. Oh, you are muted, Stephen.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Tara.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here on the Salt Spring Forum's Zoom call. The Salt Spring Forum was started a number of years ago, and I thought it was a fantastic idea, and one that could only be spawned on a terrific community like Salt Spring, where there are so many people with such expertise from so many backgrounds and from so many walks of life who've come here to make their home on this beautiful island from all parts of the world. I thought right away it was great, and a diversity of views has for the most part been presented through the forum, and it's great to see you once again hosting our candidates debate. As you will know, those of you who have seen me before, Adam and I have both been on these hustings a few times before, and it's great to see him again, of course, on the campaign trail. I was born in Sydney, British Columbia some years ago. I live on Salt Spring Island currently. I grew up here until I was about 12 years old. I then did study overseas, and I worked overseas as well, largely in Hong Kong, London, and New York. I worked in investment banking, where I was the COO for the research division in Asia Pacific, managing large teams and budgets and our operations in that part of the world. I, of course, always wanted to come home, because why wouldn't you always want to come home to this beautiful part of the world? My dad was a seaman on BC ferries. My mom was a nurse at the Lady Minto Hospital Foundation, which I subsequently eventually became chair of their hospital foundation board for a time. Why wouldn't I come back to here where I have such deep roots? I live again on Salt Spring Island with my partner and my giant schnauzer, Sydney. We quite enjoy being on the Gulf Islands. It's great to be here, but it's also great to be part of a wider community on the peninsula and on Vancouver Island. We are islanders after all. So it's been my pleasure to put myself forward again as candidate for election.
Great, thank you very much, Stephen. Okay, so we're going to start off with some of the questions that have already been submitted. First one that I have, we're going to do some that are to all candidates first. And I've got one here that's quite long, so bear with me while I read this, but it's also of a very important subject. So there are loads of people living in their cars on Salt Spring, working people that can't find housing. The Islands Trust has taken the approach to crack down on Airbnb short-term accommodations, which is where the tourists stay. Their theory is that by eliminating short-term accommodations, Airbnb, then those accommodations will be available for workers. What they don't realize is the domino effect that will kill tourism on the island and hurt the businesses, restaurants, art galleries, etc. Those businesses won't need the workers anymore, and the workers leave. Now the economy is hurt. The businesses are hurt, the property owners are hurt. This is a vicious cycle and not the solution. The long-term solution is for Islands Trust to allow for low-income housing development. The short-term solution is to allow landowners to put up temporary accommodations for the homeless workers on Salt Spring. Mike, now, obviously they've given you the whole solution there, so you're good to go. But their question is, how are you going to help with low-income housing crisis on Salt Spring? And we're going to do this. I think we'll go one at a time again. We'll start with Adam this time in order to switch it up.
Thank you for the question. I think what's important is that we move away from the government's philosophy of building housing units. Houses need to be homes for people that create the stability in our community. And there's no doubt that the Southern Gulf Islands have had a real struggle in creating the diversity, the complete community diversity of homes that are needed, a range from the expensive homes all the way to social housing and co-op housing. There's challenges with water shortages. There's challenges with the lack of ability to build micro units as well as tiny homes. And that's work that we've been doing with the provincial government with respect to the building code. And over the past 3.5 years, I've been very happy that the BC Housing and the provincial ministry has invested in some relief. We need to continue to do that. We need to continue to build on the investments that have been made in housing for families and housing for the workforce.
Okay, great. Thank you, Adam. And we'll use the same question now. Over to you, Stephen.
Thanks again. It's a great question, and it's one of the things I highlight as being a significant issue for Salt Spring Island. A lack of housing for people who come and service our community. Many of the seniors that we have here are fantastic. Lady Minto Hospital. It's difficult for us to attract nursing staff and care staff to the hospital if they can't find affordable housing here on the island. We've got a number of different jurisdictions or authorities, I should say, at work on Salt Spring, whether it's the Islands Trust or one of the water authorities, whether it's the CRD. it's challenging to come up with solutions that all of them can sign up for. If we can't connect people to water supplies, we can't really build housing. If we can't find the land to zone properly for the kind of housing that we need, then it's also difficult to do that. There have been many attempts to try and bridge these difficulties and bring these groups together, but it is a challenge because they all have a different mandate. So government really needs to help on Salt Spring Island. It's where the provincial government can play a role, the CRD can play a role, where some of the housing authorities that we have on the southern part of Vancouver Island can assist us as well. Even Victoria Housing could extend their reach up here. It's something we have to work on together because currently it's not working and not enough people can find affordable housing.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And now we are over to you, Zeb. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you then. This is a really significant issue in the entire region, and it's one that I've been familiar with as a municipal councillor since I was first elected in 2002. In Central Saanich, speaking to that, I championed us becoming a member of the Regional Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and since then I have advocated for various housing projects, and some have been built, and I'm proud of those. And some in Brentwood Bay, as Adam would know, and perhaps Stephen as well. The NDP has, in 3.5 years, taken some major steps to address this challenge, but it is a challenge that is going to take more time. 3.5 years of finally returning an investment to housing and to address this problem after the period of time where the Liberals were in power of 16 years, where this was a neglected issue. We saw price of housing and a lack of affordable housing going up astronomically. So the NDP is supportive, and we would support the renter's rebate. Unfortunately, that was blocked in the last go around. I think I saw a hand up. Was that to be?
That's the end of your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question, which is again for all candidates. I would like all 3 candidates to disclose all of the vehicles that they own and which one they drive the most often and why. If it isn't one, why is it not a plug-in EV vehicle? As a follow-up, I'd like to know if they'd support a ban for all provincial agencies to purchase any new internal combustion engines effective immediately, as this would stimulate the EV market and build up the infrastructure for all to follow, leading by example. And this time, I believe we're starting with you, Zeb.
Great. I love this question. I've long been an advocate of electric vehicles. I had a Leaf. Now we have a Bolt. We have one vehicle. So between driving the Bolt and riding the bicycle, I would say the Bolt is probably winning in terms of the more common one that I take. In terms of, and I've advanced this at the municipal level. We need more charging stations. We need more people. We've got a goal in my municipality that I helped establish of 4,800 more electric vehicles, because to meet our climate targets in Central Saanich, we all need to get on board with this. This is so important. This is a matter of survival. I think there was another aspect to that question in terms of specific policy that would I support. I would certainly want to absolutely support seeing whatever we can do to increase the number of electric vehicles within government agencies, etc. Again, this is about survival. So happy to talk further with people about the details of that.
Okay, great, thank you. I think I've got my order slightly confused, but I'm going over to Stephen now, I believe.
Yes, probably I was supposed to have started that last question.
I know, I'm going to get you on the next one.
Never mind.
Maybe 2 in a row.
Thanks. It's an interesting put your money where your mouth is question, and I'm glad to field it. I have 2 vehicles. I have a Jeep that I bought some 10 years ago, which mostly stays parked because about 4 years ago, I bought a plug-in electric vehicle that I use every day to do just about everything. I feel better about the environment, about cost savings, of course, that you get with an electric vehicle when I have to go into town to pick things up or whatever it is I need to do. I think this is the way forward for us in British Columbia. I'm not sure how much more we need to incentivize people, because I'm friends with the EV crowd on Salt Spring and Jim Standen, their great leader and promoter. I bumped into him in the dog park not too many weeks ago, and he told me that the Tesla Model 3 is the #1 selling vehicle in British Columbia now, and that's all vehicles, not just electric vehicles. So I think British Columbians know what the best way forward is. They're taking up the challenge and the cause, and they are switching over to electric vehicles. Do we need more infrastructure for electric vehicles? Absolutely, 100%, and I'm behind that 100%.
Okay, thank you. And Adam, you are up
Thank
next.
you. Yeah, and thank you for the question. And it's not surprising, as every time I come to Salt Spring, I'm reminded of the increase in number of electric vehicles that have been purchased since the last time I visited Salt Spring. I'm very proud of the being the most electric vehicles per capita anywhere in the world, or something I think I'm told and informed. We own 2 Nissan Leafs. We own a 2014 and a more modern version, the 2019. We have gone completely EV. The BC Greens, and I fully support this, want to expand the zero emission vehicle mandate so that by 2035, 100% of vehicles, new commercial vehicle sales are electric vehicles. We want to support the affordability of electric vehicles by removing the PST on used EVs. And we want to, and we will expand the charging infrastructure, because we know 36% of the emissions in our province come from transportation. And the only way that we're going to be able to meet our climate goals that are set out in Clean BC, a project that I'm very proud that we worked with the BC-NDP on, we need to get to the solutions, and reducing emissions from transportation is one of the best ways that we can do that.
Great, thank you, Adam. Okay. And happy that we had a trifecta there on all of you with EVs. That's fantastic. So now we have another question, which again is going to be all candidates, which is how will you make possible the pedestrian paths and bike lanes from Fulford to Vesuvius and from Fulford to Ruckle Park? And we are starting with Stephen this time.
As you know, Salt Spring has many narrow, winding roads, and a lot of those corners are very dangerous for cyclists. So we have to do a better job of making those roads safe. I would lobby, of course, for the provincial government to do a better job of that. The Gulf Islands are a great recreational area, not just for people on the Gulf Islands, but for British Columbians who come from all parts of the province to see the natural beauty here and to enjoy them. If we could do a better job of making those roads safe, and that's something I would advocate for, we could get better bike lanes, we get more tourists visiting in a way that's environmentally friendly to the island and supporting our local businesses as well. So I'd be a big advocate.
Okay, and then to Zeb, no, to Adam next, sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that question. And as I've stated, I think one of the most important infrastructure investments that the provincial government needs to make in its transportation network here on the Southern Gulf Islands is an increase in active transportation, bike lanes, pedestrian-friendly Fulford-Ganges Road. And I've stood in your community, and I've said this a number of times, that it needs to be part of the clean recovery. It needs to be part of the investments that are made. Unfortunately, when the BC-NDP rolled out the clean recovery plan, the $1.5 billion that all 3 parties agreed to, they made it very unclear how that money is going to be accessed. As your MLA, I will go back to Victoria and I'll make sure that that clarity is given, and that infrastructure like this, as Stephen pointed out, is both important for the commuters' safety on Salt Spring Island, because I know that the community there wants to have active transportation options and safe active transportation options, but it's also an economic imperative for the Gulf Islands as well, so people can visit the Gulf Islands on their bicycles and on their bicycles.
Great, thank you. And over to Zeb.
I'd like to begin with saying that I'm used to every week going to meetings and getting things done for people in the community regardless of political stripes and backgrounds, and even, if people are a bit resistant, I'm pretty persistent. I have fought for example, a pathway, a sidewalk in front of Adam's home for a long time, and have gone door to door and collected signatures, and so, that's been an ongoing thing over 10 years. I worked at that. And I think it's that persistence and willingness to work with people that helps to get projects done. It's not always the first time that you propose something that you get things done. So I bring that to the table, and I'm hopeful that if I'm at the cabinet table, I'll be able to get things done much easier than if if we elect an opposition member. So with that, I'm hopeful, and I'll be persistent, and it may take some time, but I won't quit.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We have another question, which is for all candidates. I don't understand. Everyone running for office has solutions to save the world and promises to do so. But when they get elected, nothing seems to change. Why is that? Is there something about power that makes you forget your promises? Nothing else matters when our forests are burning, drinking water is tainted, storms rip our houses apart, and our soil is depleted and barren. Please explain to me why nothing happens. We're going to, and I said, Stephen, that I would start with you twice, so we're going to Stephen again.
I appreciate the questioner's frustration. It does seem like there's always promises, and there are always offers from the political parties to make things happen, and many of them don't. We've seen that in spades, I think, in the past 3 years. We don't have $10 a day child daycare. We don't have lower emissions in British Columbia. They've gone up since the NDP came into power. We haven't seen housing solutions. In fact, the housing and homelessness problem, the addictions problem, is worse than any of us have ever seen in Victoria and other communities in our province. What we need is people who are principled and want to get to work on some of these problems. And I know that's difficult to differentiate who are the candidates in front of you that want to do that. But take the time to do some research and find people who've achieved results, I think, in their private life prior to getting into politics, and see if you can't find people who live by their word and actually walk the talk. It's increasingly frustrating for me too. We're not supposed to be having an election either at the moment. In fact, the law says we shouldn't be having an election, but we're having an election because a politician didn't keep his word. He didn't keep his agreement with the Green Party either. That's why we're here in the pandemic. It discredits every one of us running for political office. And I'm frankly quite annoyed about that.
Okay, and let's go over to you, Zeb. You're next up.
Following on the previous point, I think, as has been said in the debate last night by the leaders, I think it's always a good thing to listen to the people. I would agree with that comment from our leader, John Horgan. So I have no concerns with an election and listening to the people, particularly the situation we're in with the pandemic. What I wanted to mention was we can't forget bringing people with us in a lot of these changes. And so it's one thing for us to say, this is what you should do, this is what you should do. But I think that we really need to remember that we have to bring people along with us. Again, I am persistent. I keep going, and I encourage other people not to give up, because if you do, we eventually get these projects done. We make change for the better, and we need to do that where we bring people along with us. So I've got a track record of that, and I'm hopeful that I can work with you to do more for us and restore that hope.
Okay, and Adam.
First of all, I have to correct the record. Zeb knows full well that the funding for that pathway on Stelly's Crossroad came because the First Nations went to the federal government. Please don't take credit for something that you didn't do.
No, I didn't fund it. I didn't fund it.
That's the First Nations project.
Yeah.
The reason why, to answer the question, there's two biases that are really important that we acknowledge here and that we name. The sunk cost bias, the clearest example of that is Site C, and the status quo bias. The clearest example of that is the fact that there's still old growth logging on the coast of the province. For decades, the BC-NDP, for a decade, the BC-NDP stood up and criticized the Liberals for pushing Site C. They're doing it because of the sunk cost bias. The reason why we're still cutting old growth under the NDP is because of the status quo bias. These are two really important biases that we have to overcome in our decision making. We have to recognize that we have to stop throwing good money after bad and stop a project that's no good. And we have to stop cutting old growth and cannot continue with our 1950s frack, log, and dredge program that the BC NDP have continued that was frankly set in place a century ago.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, we are now going to go to some individual questions. We're going to start off with one for Zeb King. We have a minute and a half to answer this one rather than just a minute. What is the estimated cost of building the Site C dam, and does that estimate include bringing it on stream, i.e. actually producing and distributing electricity? How confident is the government that estimated costs will within, say, a 10 to 20% range of accuracy?
So as people have heard, the Site C dam was never a project that we initiated. It was initiated under the previous government, and we then had inherited it as a province, as people, and in managing it, there was already that $4 billion sunk in, as Adam has said. At this stage, because there's some questions with Site C, I understand that there's a independent investigator looking at that. There's no promises that what exactly we will do. But I think the NDP has been the more responsible government by looking to experts in the same way that at a municipal council, members of council are not experts in engineering, for example. We do need to rely on outside experts. And then we can make a decision based on their judgment if we were to go forward. So that's where we stand at the moment with Site C, and I think it's the prudent, responsible direction. It's not necessarily a green light at this stage, but it is to get advice from an expert. The NDP has done that from the beginning on this project, and I think, again, it's the responsible thing to do.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to have an individual question for Adam Olsen. What do you intend to do about the recent dramatic increase in freighters anchored around Salt Spring and the Gulf Islands? We're part of the Gulf Islands National Park Reserve, and as such, this area is expected to remain in pristine condition. I understand that the use of these anchorages was a 6-month experiment, yet 2 years later, the number of boats is further increasing, producing more and more pollution, environmental problems, light and noise.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it is one of those really challenging multi-jurisdictional issues. It includes the provincial government's ownership of the ocean floor, the federal government's ownership of the water column and the surface, Port Metro Vancouver's increasing shipping traffic, as well as Terminal 2 at Roberts Bank. It includes local government decision-making in the Islands Trust, as well as the CRD. So what I've proposed and what I began building and working towards prior to the snap election call was a similar body as to the Howe Sound Forum, where all levels of government can coordinate our advocacy. We've been meeting with Elizabeth May, with the Islands trustees, the CRD directors, and I've started to reach out to the local First Nations groups, Husaitnich, the Cowichan, and the Penelakut. The goal is to bring these bodies together into, let's call it the Gulf Islands Forum or Southern Gulf Islands Forum, to create a local advocacy body, recognizing that we need to advocate to the Minister of Transport federally. We need to advocate to Transport Canada. We need to put in place some infrastructure so that so that if those ships are going to be parked there and the federal government insists on it, then we need to make sure that there's shore plugs so that they are not burning diesel unnecessarily. We need to make sure that the Indigenous nations treaty rights are not being infringed by their anchors. So that's the reason why we're coming together and working together to find a solution for the advocacy of this issue.
Great, thank you very much, Adam. And now an individual question for the Liberal candidate, Stephen Roberts. Mr. Roberts, how can your party possibly justify eliminating our provincial sales tax while we're going to have to dig ourselves out of a large economic hole following the pandemic, assuming that we get out the other side? Isn't this trying to bribe voters?
So that's an excellent question. I've been asked that on the door as well. But the important thing to remember with the PST elimination for 1 year and then the reduction for the remaining years until there's recovery in place, and we can see that happening, is that it benefits not just consumers. So it's not just it's not a bribe for consumers. It's also for business. It's for small businesses in particular in British Columbia. They pay PST on their inputs. They need to pass PST along to consumers who buy things from them. In as much as it might help consumers every year, it's going to help small businesses in our communities. We're finding that many small businesses are going to struggle to survive through this winter because they don't have the customers that they normally would have had. Instead of ordering something online, you'll be able to order something from a local business and support them, and you won't have to pay PST on it. It's going to put a hole in the budget for a year for sure, and for a second year, a smaller hole, but that
Oh, I think we've got a pause on Stephen. So we will go on to another question and catch up with him on the rest of, we'll give him his time back when his internet unfreezes.
that's an investment we're going to have to make.
Well, we're still
Are you back?
having trouble.
I can see you again. Now you're all moving again.
Okay, you can continue.
Where was I? In as much as it's a tax cut that benefits consumers, it's more importantly for businesses in our province. If you were going to order something online from out of the province and save the provincial sales tax, you're not going to be doing that now. You're going to buy locally. Jurisdictions around the Western world are going to be in debt as a result of the global pandemic. It's really a wartime measure almost. And all of us are going to be in the same boat, but we need to support our vulnerable citizens. We need to support our businesses, make sure we do come out of this the other side.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We are now going to go to some questions that have been posed live. Let's see. This one is for all the panelists. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness of the Islands Trust in responding to the challenges of our current world? And I think we're due to start with possibly Adam. Yes. Okay.
The Islands Trust is thank you for the question. The Islands Trust is a unique governance structure in the province of British Columbia, basically separating the servicing of the CRD with the land use of the Islands Trust. I think one of the challenges is with the Islands Trust is that it has the zoning that has persisted on the islands has created a certain type of housing, and as we talked about earlier, has created challenges to create a diversity, a complete community, similar to what can be achieved in municipal governments. I think the Islands Trust, to some extent, has preserved and protected the islands for the benefit of all British Columbians. One of the gaps with the Islands Trust, though, is that it doesn't have authority to manage and to regulate tree cutting. And so there are significant governance gaps with the Islands Trust. And I know that in talking with the Islands trustees that there is interest in having a provincial government that's willing to sit at the table and talk about the governance challenges of the Islands Trust Act and to do something about it and to have an honest discussion about where it stands.
Right. Thank you very much, Adam. Okay, and I believe that we are we at Stephen next, or Zeb? I think we'll go to Stephen.
Sounds good to me. I would echo Adam's comments that the Islands Trust has got a limited area of jurisdiction. It's about land use in the Gulf Islands. It's got a mandate to preserve and protect the unique environment and communities of the Gulf Islands. It's done a great job, I think, on the environmental part. Many good islanders have put their names forward to be Islands trustees and do their best for the islands. But they're not responsible for roads. They're not responsible for actually building housing. They're not responsible for water authorities that exist on the islands. They're not responsible for things like cutting down trees. Municipalities do many of those things, and we don't have that on Salt Springs. So we do need to look at a government structure that will more effectively serve the needs of islanders. The Islands Trust is doing a great job, but it only goes so far. And we need some more involvement or some additional authority for this body or for a different body to be able to deliver for islanders.
Oh, you're muted. I'm not sure.
I am muted, you're right.
Okay, good.
Thank you, we're over to Zeb now.
Great, thank you. Well, what I can say is that since I was elected in 2002, it's been about 4 or 5 times that I've voted at the Union of BC Municipalities for the resolution to extend those greater powers to the Islands Trust. I should just mention that the Islands Trust was a creation of an NDP government back in the 70s, and I'm proud of that work because it was established to protect the islands. But I think that there is always time to review and renew those structures, and it sounds as though this is a time for that, particularly with regards to concerns about trees and about private forest areas. So I would be certainly happy to look at that.
Okay, thank you. Now we have another question that has come in, which is to all of the candidates. And this time we'll begin with Stephen. And the question is, we are in a climate crisis. We can't afford another 4 years of pollution as usual. If elected, would you immediately stop subsidies and any expansion to fracking and LNG, and instead invest in a just transition? Thank you. Stephen first.
Thank you very much again, Tara. As we come out of the global pandemic, we're going to need to bring all of our minds to bear on recovery. Part of that is making sure that people have jobs to go to. LNG in the north has been supported by the BC Liberals. It's been supported by the NDP as well. It's a means by which we can get a cleaner fossil fuel to market in Asia. If the Chinese continue to build 40 coal-powered plants every year, as they've said they intend to do so, the world is going to suffer a much greater climate degradation than it is from the 5 million citizens of British Columbia producing liquid LNG. We have to think globally when we consider the climate crisis. We have to think about the transition. We can't turn off fossil fuels overnight. We want to get there. We want to stop them, but there's going to be a time frame where we're going to have to work with both. And a lot of the transition funding will come from fossil fuels as we ease it out. But we want to make sure we look at the global picture and have a global perspective on this before we make any rash decisions that will cause British Columbians to have no work and no jobs, and also not be contributing to the change in the global economic and environmental condition.
Okay, thank you. Zeb, you are next.
This is probably the biggest issue we face, in my view. The work of Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the Green Party, in working with the NDP was quite fantastic, and I'm happy for that. We have the best climate plan in North America, but as I've experienced municipally, we cannot rest on our laurels. We have more work to do. We have about 10 years to make dramatic cuts in our carbon emissions. And so in terms of how to make that shift, it was Margaret Atwood who recently said at UBCM, it's like a train barreling down the tracks. If you slam on the brakes, you know what happens to the people on the train, they get hurt. So what we need to do is actually help people to make that transition. So I was happy to hear in the question about a just transition. The NDP understands helping people come along with us. We don't just simply leave them at the wayside, and we don't sort of guilt them to all be driving, Teslas. We have to help people along.
Okay, thank you. And over to Adam Olsen.
Yeah, so transitioning from one fossil fuel to another is not much of a transition at all. It's the gymnastics that the NDP candidate is going through here to try to justify the massive $6 billion subsidy of the greenhouse gas emitting LNG and fracking industry is really, it's actually quite incredible. We have to absolutely stop the subsidy of fossil fuels. Fossil fuel industry in this province doesn't exist without you and I putting $6 billion, thank you to the BC NDP, into that industry, actually the BC NDP and the BC Liberals. We're not leaving people behind in our plan. We're taking the money that we're putting in the fossil fuel industry and investing it in the businesses that help us get to the low carbon clean economy that we need to get in. It's not good enough to just say, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050 and then leave it to chance. You actually have to have a plan. And the Clean BC plan is supposed to be that economic plan. It's 75% done, meaning 25% of that was supposed to be found sitting in the legislature right now. Instead, we're on the campaign trail. So the plan's not done yet. It's a half-baked plan as it stands right now. And that's because the NDP choose to be on the election trail here rather than actually solving the problems that we have in front of us right now.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, our next question, again, for all of the candidates is, we have a school district that is currently being forced to reconfigure schools and programs due to a chronic funding shortfall. We are the only district that depends so extensively on water taxis, and the cost of this service takes money out of classrooms. How would you address this systemic inequity? Would you support a special funding program for the Gulf Islands in order to pay for transportation? And we are going to start with Zeb first.
I was just participating today in the school board's meeting, listening in, and it was quite fascinating to hear about this issue. I've been in touch with people who are quite concerned about it on the islands in terms of what it means for their kids. And I think that, you know, the consequence of this, as I see it, is there's declining enrollment, but there's also the legacy of that period of time when there was a lack of investment and funding in our school boards from the previous government. So I would be happy to facilitate this discussion with the Minister of Education. And I think that being in cabinet in a government would give, if I was so lucky to be in that position, would give more access and an ability to help resolve this issue. Therefore, that's a plug and encouragement for people to vote for me as your representative, because then I can be within government and get things done for people.
Thank you. Next up is Adam Olsen.
Well, it's kind of interesting dangling your own cabinet position when in fact there's a ton of NDP cabinet ministers in this region, and we know that there's certain math that is involved in that, and it's certainly not the MLAs that pick who's in cabinet. We've supported a hybrid funding model. The per student funding model that is currently where we treat a one size fits all, a funding model that the BC NDP have continued to support, just doesn't work. It's time to modernize the funding model. We need to have a hybrid system where there is a mix of perhaps a per student funding that goes to each district. And then after that, districts can apply for special funding that takes into consideration students with designations, for example, special geographic locations, and clearly the Gulf Islands School District is one of those school districts that would benefit from a modernization of the funding model. I think it's also important to recognize that the BC NDP has done exactly the bare minimum and nothing more than that on education funding since taking over power 3.5 years ago.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Stephen, if you're next.
Thank you again. I remember when I was a kid years ago that students from the smaller Gulf Islands, from Galliano, Pender, and Maine, used to come and billet in our homes for the week. They would come on Monday afternoon after school and stay till Thursday, then return to their islands on Friday. So I'm well aware of the unique difficulties of having a disparate population on different islands. The Gulf Islands do actually get a greater proportion of their per student funding than other similar school districts in the province because of that locality, but I think there's definitely room to assist more. As the questioner points out, there's water taxis and those are costly, and I don't think we want to go back to the place where students had to come and stay for 4 or 5 days away from their families as they did when I was a child. We want to make sure that they're able to go home and be with their families every night, and also to participate in sports activities. That's an expensive thing for islanders too, to get off the island with sports teams. So definitely, in view of the geographic disadvantages we have in this regard, I would be supportive of getting some extra funding for our school district. They do excellent work and they deserve that.
Great, thank you. And our next question is, do you think there is too much traffic in this riding? If yes, what can be done about it? And we're going to start with Adam Olsen first.
I grew up on the Saanich Peninsula and have now started over the last 3.5 years, obviously commuting regularly into Victoria, and certainly there has been a dramatic increase in traffic. I visited Salt Spring Island during the summer, and this was last summer, and was quite astonished at the level of traffic. I think the BC Greens plan, in talking about the investments that need to be made in transit, is critical in this situation. Transportation and transit related issues are one of the highest priority issues in Saanich, North and the Islands. It's probably the single greatest issue that I hear about, that I heard about, is the MLA. We needed to look at the transit future plan that BC Transit put out a decade ago. We need to listen to the regional district, Capital Regional District, when they talk about putting together a governance body to manage transportation in a region that's got 13 municipalities and rural districts. And we need to make the investments in transit. We need to have a rapid bus transit bus line out to the Saanich Peninsula and connecting the communities with neighborhood buses. What the BC-NDP put forward over the last 2.5 years is a strategy that's basically a reformatting of all of the programs and plans that are already on the books, with no way to get there. And I think that we need to now take that plan and work with the local governments, work with the Capital Regional District to put a plan in place that gets us to the transit and active transportation infrastructure that is much needed in this region.
Thank you. And last, we'll have Zeb King on this.
Great, thank you. And my colleague Adam Olsen knows very well that for a long time I've been an advocate of transit and transportation options and improvements. I too have recognized that there's a lot more traffic in the area. And one of the things I've advocated for is fare-free transit. I'm happy that the NDP within its platform is taking a step in that direction with free transit for those aged 12 and under. I think this is a climate action goal, and it will help as we, you don't go to the library and you get charged for taking out a book at the library in the same way. Someday, I would love it if we would pay once for public transit and not pay through our property taxes, pay from the provincial, and pay a user fee. I think that what we need to do is rationalize that and make public transit user fee free. I've written an op-ed about that about a month ago, and I encourage people to take a look at that.
Okay, great, thank you. And our next one is, what is your response?
I didn't get to answer that.
Oh, you didn't answer? I'm sorry, Stephen. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. The short answer to Mina's question is yes, there's too much traffic. As someone who hasn't got onto the Salt Spring Ferry from Fulford 3 times in the last week because the lineup's been way up the hill and I've arrived 30, 40, and 45 minutes ahead of time, the answer is yes, there's too much traffic. But I think this points us to a social and an environmental change that we need to make. We need to build tighter communities where traffic's not necessary. Many of us on Salt Spring live at far reaches of the island, and there's only one town center where we can go. It involves driving and traffic and transportation. Sydney, I think, on the peninsula is doing a good job of putting more people in a smaller space, which actually builds a vital, thriving community and also reduces the need for transportation to other locations. Salt Spring, I think, could learn a little bit from that. Let's build a little bit more housing around Ganges where people can walk. It's healthier for everybody, it's healthier for the community, and it preserves some of that forest landscape that we have on the island that we also much cherish. So yes, there's too much traffic.
Great, thank you. And sorry, I almost
That's
didn't
okay,
give you
no
a chance to offer. Okay, so our next question is, what is your response to John Horgan and Andrew Wilkinson's fumbling of the question last night at the leaders' debate about systemic racism? What is your personal experience with systemic racism, and how does it show up in this riding? And we're going to start with Zeb King.
Wow, that's a great question, important question. I'm another white guy, and I know that there's a certain privilege that that people that are white men have, and we don't always recognize that exists. But regardless of whether we recognize it or not, other people can and do notice that. My wife is Korean, and I know that, you know, a person who's of a color is treated differently in certain circumstances, and it's too easy for white men to assume that that's not the case. So it's key to recognize that, and it needs to stop. That systemic racism needs to stop, whether it's in our hospitals, whether it's in our institutions. We've had an experience of that locally here, so that certainly needs to stop.
Okay, thank you. And to Stephen now.
Sure. Again, another white male answering this question, and I think we're probably the group least able to properly understand what people go through when they're subject to systemic racism. It's painful to think that our society is not fully equal, but it's not. And we have so much more work to do to make sure that it is equal. Each of us have to look inward to make sure that we're not taking advantage of that situation and that we're listening. And listening is going to be the key piece to this. It's not what's our impression or our perspective of what somebody from a minority group believes. It's listen to them. Let them tell us how they feel. Let them tell us what they think needs to be done. Because it's only by listening that we can truly understand. And I wonder if we can ever truly understand, because we have this place of privilege that we didn't ask for, but it's been that way since we were born. We have to listen to those affected by it. And that's the only way forward. We have to be understanding completely, and we have to take action to wipe it out wherever we can. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to take some time, but we have to all strive within ourselves to make this better for everybody.
Okay, and now we will go to Adam.
First, I'd like to acknowledge and raise my hands to my colleagues here who have acknowledged their privilege and who have given quality answers to this. This is perhaps the identity crisis in our country, and it's basically my identity crisis as a person of mixed heritage. It's the struggle that I've had my entire life, living with a foot on both sides of the line, frankly. I have the experience of living on an Indian reserve in this country. And I also have the experience of incredible privilege. And it's been the challenge of my life. My family's been impacted by generational impacts of residential schools. And I've taken this opportunity as the first Satanich member to stand in the legislature, to put my name, son, up in the desk that I sit in, to stand and speak to these issues with courage, with pride. And I hope to have your support in the election so that we can continue to have this voice in the legislature. These issues will not be dealt with because systemic racism is not just in individual ministries or individual systems. institutions, it's institutional wide. And we need to have the voices and the diversity in the legislature to speak these words and speak these truths.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, our next question is a forest question. I am very concerned that BC forests are emitting more GHGs than the oil and gas industry instead of buffering us from climate change as they could be doing. Have you read the New Future for Old Forests report? Does your party commit to implementing and fully funding all of its recommendations? And I believe, well, we're starting with you, Adam, so we'll just stay right on you.
Thank you. I have not yet read the report in full. So I can't tell you that we're going to implement the recommendations in full. Just to be honest, I haven't read the report in its entirety. So, but what I will tell you is that we've stood in the legislature, Sonia and I have stood in the legislature time and time again, demanding forestry reform in this province. We have such a short period of time before our forestry industry is gone entirely. We cannot continue to try to have, as the Minister of Forests tried to have over and over and over again, the cake and eat it too. We have to reform the industry. We have got to take the steps that are necessary in order to protect old growth logging. And that means not just implementing some of the recommendations of the old growth review panel, but implementing it in its entirety. We have to have tenure reform. We have to take the power and the decision-making away from corporations and put it back into the hands of communities and put it back into the hands of the provincial government.
Thank you, Adam. Over to Zeb King now.
As I mentioned in my intro, the ancient forests have always been something that I've worked hard to protect. And recently I've been reading the report on managed forest lands, the private lands, in relation to the Gulf Islands, and there's a lot there. There's recommendations that we need to take seriously, which would help places like the Islands Trust manage those lands. And I think that well, I should mention that the NDP has had a advisory committee that had come back with recommendations on how to, or what lands to protect, and put aside 350,000 hectares more recently. So there have been steps, but I think there's more work to go.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will go over to Stephen.
I would like to thank the questioner for that question. I too have to confess I have not read the report that she speaks of. Our forests are something that's always set British Columbia apart, not just in Canada, but in the world. We've got this incredible forestry resource. Old growth is largely gone, so we need to protect the stands that we have that remain. We also need a forestry industry to support some of the communities that have suffered badly under the NDP, with 43 mills closed or partially closed since they took power 3 years ago. The minister responsible, or the minister whose riding was most badly affected on the North Island, Claire Trevena, is no longer running, but she did very little to help any of the people in her community as their forestry industry suffered. We need practices that make our forestry sustainable, that allow us to continue to grow trees. I remember in the last election cycle, I visited the West Coast Forest Products Nursery in Saanishton, an incredible nursery where one of the employees there was being acknowledged for, I think, planting with 10 million trees. She propagated them there in the nursery and planted them throughout the province, or had her designates plant them throughout the province. That's the kind of thing that we can celebrate. We need to get out there and continue to plant and continue to manage more responsibly.
Okay, thank you very much. I have another individual question. This one is coming to Zeb King. I am very concerned about ending cruelty to animals in BC, e.g. factory farming, leg hold traps, puppy mills, abuse in slaughterhouses, etc. Although the SPCA has been labeled an essential service, I believe that BC does not fund their investigations into cruelty to animals. Will your party commit to funding SPCA investigations into animal cruelty?
This is a really good question, something that I would have to look at further in terms of our platform and the commitments that have been made. I'm not aware of this being a position to date, but I'd be happy to work with the questioner and look at more detail as to what this would entail, what we need to learn from, and it sounds like a reasonable thing to look into. I'd be, like I say, happy to have further communication about this. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we have one more question here that's for all. Just a second. I'm just finding it here. Kind of lost inside of another question. Here we go. To support young families, we need affordable $10 a day daycare. What is the position of each party? And we will start this time with Stephen.
Thanks for the question. Very relevant today when so many working families with the COVID pandemic are needing to have somebody stay home to look after kids and certainly to be there if they have to come home from school. Daycare is critically important. Our party in its platform has announced a new plan that might actually work. The NDP plan, they promised everybody $10 a day daycare. They haven't delivered on that. Our plan is to have $10, $20, and $30 daycare for everybody in the province that needs it on a graduated scale, which is means tested according to your income. This actually might happen because it's more realistic than $10 a day, which would have been so expensive and which was impossible for the NDP to implement.
No.
We need to train more people to look after children. We need more spaces, and it's not going to happen under the NDP's program. We need to look after people who work in our communities and who have children because they're our future, and daycare is vital to that.
Okay, thank you. And Adam Olsen?
Thank you. The approach that we, of course, have been supportive of and advocated for free universal childcare for children. The approach that we're taking is a family-focused approach. We want to provide supports for families of various kinds. So for example, if you are a stay-at-home parent, then we will provide up to $500 in childcare to support you. If you have a child under 3 and you're a working parent, then we'll provide free early childhood education. And for 4 and 5-year-olds, we'll provide up to 25 hours of free early childhood education. We're going to actually do what we've been asking the provincial government to do, the BC NDP to do, and they've been very reluctant until this campaign platform came out, to move childcare from MCFD into education where it belongs, so that we have a continuum of lifelong learning. I think what's most important is that we also have to be dealing with work-life balance. And as a parent with young children, 2 working parents, I know that dealing with work-life balance is a really important aspect. So remote working, investigating what 4-day work week looks like, and work with employers to better incent work-life balance.
Thank you. And Zeb King, now it's for you.
Thank you. This has long been a commitment for the BC NDP, as you had said in the last election, and we made every effort to try to put this forward. We were blocked along the way. The Green Party didn't support this. And I should just say, in Central Saanich, speaking to my municipal role that I've held for 15 years, we've just recently had a report at council that shows that all the peninsula municipalities are in desperate need of childcare. That's not just for families and people with kids, it's also for businesses. I don't have kids myself, but I'm very much supportive of childcare. I think this is a step in the right direction, and hopefully if we can elect a majority government, and that hopefully I can have a role in that government, we can get this done for people.
Great, thank you. I wouldn't forget anybody this time. So this is the last question of the evening, and in full disclosure, this is my question. It's a 2-parter, and it's for all of the candidates. First, I'd like to know, what is the one thing that you are the most passionate about personally when it comes to representing this riding? What do you care about the most, and where do you want to make an impact if you're elected? And secondly, what do you think the most pressing issue is for our riding, province, perhaps our world as we come out of COVID? How do you see the recovery? And we are going to start this time with, I believe this one was starting with Zeb.
Thank you. The most pressing issue, as I mentioned prior to this, was it's that we are at a watershed moment. We have a confluence of all sorts of crises. We have this pandemic, we have other things, but we have this climate crisis that we really desperately need to address. I've spent my life trying to address these issues. And a key expression that I've learned at the council table is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Things are not perfect. I'm not perfect. Our party's not perfect. Platforms are not perfect, but we need to be resilient. We need to keep making things better. And I think that we have a better shot, a better chance of making a difference on the climate change front if we can elect somebody to be in government. And so therefore, I'm hopeful that I can have your support so we can actually make a difference and not have simply symbolic votes in opposition.
Okay, thank you. And Stephen, you're up next.
Hi, thanks, Tara. There's no question in my mind that the biggest issue we face right now is the pandemic and the follow-up. We've got a healthcare crisis, and now we have an economic crisis. We need to support families in British Columbia to recover from this. We need to support our local businesses to recover from this. If we're going to get a future for British Columbia, we need to incentivize businesses to continue to work. We've got to provide our various supports for them. If government does only one thing for its citizens, it should be to support them in their time of need and vulnerability. So for me, the pandemic is critical. We need experienced people. We need people with ideas on how to help us break out of the pandemic and how to make sure that we get BC back to work as quickly as possible and on a stable footing. That for me is the most important issue in the province at the moment.
Okay, and thank you so much, Stephen. And over to you, Adam.
A minute, 1 minute to answer this question.
Yeah, to tell everything.
I think we're facing three concurrent crises in our province. We've had this ongoing climate change, climate crisis, the recovery from the COVID pandemic, as Stephen has highlighted, as well as we have a mental health and addictions and opioid crisis. 5,600 British Columbians since 2016 have passed away from illicit drug overdoses. But I'm going to focus on something because I think that it's really important that we clear the record. Our government is made up of 87 MLAs, and there is a really important role, and to diminish the role of the governance that happens in that legislature is an unfortunate product of tonight's debate, to suggest that the only value that happens in the legislature happens on the governing side of the House. I've happened to be sitting in the legislature with a foot straddling on either side, and I can tell you there is an incredibly important role of government, of the cabinet. There's an important role of backbenchers. There's also an important role of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, and there's an important role of all opposition members, and its governance and its accountability and transparency. Let's not undermine that, because when we undermine it, we undermine our own democracy, and that is a huge mistake, especially at a time when we have to deal with these three concurrent public health and crisis in our province. See, a majority government is about obedience. Mr. Horgan had the letter of support that the BC Greens were going to continue to work with him. It's not what he wanted. What he wanted was a majority government to not have to have any accountability or transparency. So let's be honest about the conversation.
He wanted to hear from the voters.
It's not true.
Well, that's what we're doing. This is an election. We're there.
We're going to have, you're each going to have another minute to make your case on whatever you would like to, because we have closing statements now. So we're going to go in the reverse order of that we started. So instead of beginning alphabetically from the, we're going to start with, who did we start with on the first side? We started with Zeb, didn't we? Or did we start with Stephen?
This is on, we're at the closing, are we? Yeah.
So we're gonna go to Stephen for the first statement. This is the last minute that you have for making a closing statement. Thank you.
Thanks again, Tara, and thanks everybody for listening to us this evening. This is an important election for British Columbians. It's an election we shouldn't be having, and I don't think we should be rewarding a government in power for having an election that's a year early, that breaks its agreement with its coalition partners, and that frankly flies in the face of a global pandemic, potentially endangering people as they need to go out and vote. We can't engage the same way with voters as we should be engaging because of the pandemic, and it's irresponsible for this government to have called this election. What you've seen is some competing visions of the way forward, but there's been very little on the ground from the NDP about what they would propose to do following the pandemic. The BC Liberals have laid down idea after idea, including the PSD cut. And I see from some of the comments, that's a great part of this medium, that someone said, no, I'm wrong, the PSD is not paid on inputs. Well, it actually is. If you have a guy coming to work at your house and he's a carpenter and he has to buy a saw, he has to pay PST on it. And ultimately you'll pay for that, but everything that he uses to build your house or to build your deck is going to have to pay PST on. We're incentivizing local business. We're incentivizing consumers to use local business. We want to have rent supports for some people who are tenants, for some of the businesses who are tenants. We also want to offer a lifeline to our hospitality industry where so many people work. The BC Liberals are the ones with a plan to come out of the pandemic. And I know a minute is a very short time to summarize this, but thanks for listening tonight, everybody. I appreciate it. And I'd like to be the guy who supports you in Victoria as we come out of the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And we are now to Adam Olsen.
Thanks, to the Salt Spring Forum for hosting this incredible event this evening, and thank you for the opportunity of representing Saanich North and the Islands. I have so much gratitude for you and for your warm reception. I am blessed with the ability to get to know you and the Salt Spring community. Representing this riding requires a commitment to getting to know the diverse needs of these communities. I've shown that by dedication, by making myself available at any time to listen with an open heart and to understand how I can better serve you. As a legislator, I've accepted my role as in the balance of responsibility, holding government accountable while being productive and an honorable partner, maintaining my agreement to always work in good faith and no surprises. As the teaching of my Husainich ancestors instructs, I've always strived to walk in this role in a good way. I will continue in this approach every day that I have the honor of serving your community. And so I ask, whenever you vote and however you vote, please vote for me, Adam Olsen, Haitskoisiam.
Thank you, Adam, and good timing. Okay, and to Zeb King for the final statement.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being here. I was thinking, when I was thinking about how to wrap up, a few months ago, walking with my wife, we like to go for walks around the neighborhood, and we would go for a walk, and then we'd start to hear the pots and pans banging, of course. And it was really quite moving to hear that, or to see the signs of support for the frontline workers. I said to my wife, that's for you. That's for you. That's for the teachers. That's for the grocery store workers. That's for all those frontline workers. And of course, they are often usually very selfless. They don't say, oh, yeah, great. It's actually, they just do their work. I think that this pandemic has shown how much we need those frontline workers. We need a government that's going to invest in them, that's going to support them, because as it's been said many, many times, we're all in this together. That sense of solidarity that we've been reminded of with those pots and pans ringing, being banged and stuff, is a reminder that we live in the same society, in the same community, and we need each other. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all of our candidates, and we wish you all the best of luck. Also, thank you to Jason Mogus of Netchange, without whom this would not have happened tonight. And most importantly, thank you to the public for watching, and we hope you have a clearer picture of who you should vote for now. Remember, every vote counts. And Jason, I think you're going to just wrap us up.
Yes, thanks everybody. Looks like most of us stayed on till the end. And I also want to thank the candidates. We live in these interesting times of a lot of mistrust of institutions and a lot of strong emotions about how the world should or shouldn't be, and I appreciate the effort you're all putting in to stand.
Thank you.
You're also frontline workers right now. And appreciate that. For those of you who have colleagues that weren't able to tune in, or family, this link from this recording will be made available on the saltspringforum.com website as of tomorrow. And you can also look out for it at YouTube. Also, thank you to the Salt Spring Exchange as media partner and Country Grocer for supporting the forum. Luckily, the forum, as I know as a past board member, was in a good financial position before the pandemic hit. Not an easy time for an events-based organization either. But yeah, thanks, Tara. You did a wonderful job. And if we were together, there would be gifts being exchanged. We'll just send our appreciations out to everybody. And everybody can enjoy an extra 8 minutes in your evening.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Night, everyone.
Good night.